as the monetary and fiscal policies regulator for the West African region. Over this history-making 125 years, our bank, your bank, has forged an incredible partnership with its people and built an enduring heritage through a vast array of seasons and societies to remain an icon of admiration in today's financial services industry in Middle Africa. We are therefore celebrating a Pan-African icon woven into the fabric of our society. The 125th anniversary lecture is FirstBank's contribution to the exchange of ideas on how to foster thought and lead and shape the agenda for global leadership, development, and prosperity, especially in the developing world. The keynote speaker today will be Darren Asimoglu, Professor of Economics at MIT Boston and the author of Why Nations Fail, who will speak on the theme Institutional Impact on Economic Growth and Improved Living Standards. It's my very great pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of the Chairman and Board of FBN Holdings PLC, the Chair and Board of FirstBank Nigeria PLC. A very warm welcome to the wife of the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, the representative, apologies, I actually should have started properly with the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, as represented this morning by Mrs. Zainab Ahmed, who is, of course, our Minister of Finance. And in the hope that my apology is accepted, may I very warmly welcome also the wife of the Vice President of Nigeria, Mrs. Donako. We have, at least I know I've seen, a former governor in the room today, Chief Peter Obi, former governor of Nigeria, and of course, a political mediator of note. We have honorable ministers present, the Honorable Minister of Power, Works and Transport, Housing. And I know you all pay very good attention, and you all know who he is. There are some former ministers in the room. In order to save some time, permit me just to recognize them, thank them for their service to the nation, and welcome them. Some distinguished parliamentarians and our royal fathers. I see the representatives of the Olu of Wari here this morning, and I'm sure they're not sure. We have eminent bankers in the room, many of them, some of whom have of course passed through FirstBank, and others unfortunately who haven't. We have our wonderful customers here. Over the last 125 years, perhaps not for personal banking, there's nobody who can count 125 years ago that's present, but there must be a few institutions who have banked with this bank for almost as long. And last, and certainly not least, this morning, I'd like you all to congratulate the loyal, dedicated staff of FirstBank who have kept this bank going responsible for guiding and steering the board, not just of the holding company, of the bank as well. His career as a banker was maybe a long time ago, looking after customers. But tonight, this afternoon, he's a very, very proud holder of the heritage of FirstBank. As you can all see, on a day such as this, to be part of a history-making event, I cannot be faultless. Thank you very much.
the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, ably represented by the Honorable Minister of Finance, Mrs. Ahmed, Your Excellency, the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, ably represented also here by Mrs. Oshibagi. Honorable ministers who are here, former ministers, former governors, distinguished friends, and indeed I can see the special minister here, who happens to also be our brother, Minister Fashola. He stands very tall in every crowd, and I dare not stand next to him. Friends of FirstBank of Nigeria, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, mine is a very simple assignment, but extremely sentimental as well, of strong historical importance because of the heritage that has fallen to be our turn to manage. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I want to use this opportunity to celebrate with all of us for being privileged to be here on a day like this. 125 years in the life of any institution is extremely remarkable. Much so of a banking institution. Those who know the industry of banking can well appreciate the risks that attach to the industry. We have passed through phases of history, cycles of economic ups and downs, and we are here today standing. Thanksgiving to the Almighty God who has made it possible, and I want to sincerely appreciate all those who've been part of this long history. Our former staff, our former directors, all our customers, and all those who make us who we are today. This is part of our celebration, and I want to say we are doing this on behalf of all of us. We are doing it on behalf of Nigerians. We are also doing this to continue to remind you that our assignment, the assignment that you have given us, is in good hands. Thank you very much for making time to be here. And please, go on with us on this journey. We are looking forward to the next 125 years, and we'll all be there. Thank you very much.
We have two important international guests here this morning. And I saved this moment to welcome, especially Mr. George Gian Bafor, the Honorable Minister for Budget and Planning for Ghana. Welcome. Our other guest, of course, is our notable guest speaker today, who is delivering a lecture on the institutional impact on economic growth and improved living standards. Professor Daron Acemoglu, Professor of Economics at MIT, Boston, and author of Why Nations Fail. Now, it's not easy to try and reduce Professor Dan Asemoglu's CV into something that is portable for a few minutes. But for those who don't know, he's a Turkish-born American economist, and he has taught at MIT since 1993. He's currently the Elizabeth and James Killian Professor of Economics at MIT, that very famous Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Born to Armenian parents in Istanbul, he was educated in the UK and completed his PhD at the LSE, London School of Economics, 25. He then lectured for a year before joining MIT. He was awarded the John Bates Clark Medal in 2005, and he is very well known for his work on political economy. Naturally, has authored hundreds of papers and co-authored them with his longtime collaborators, Simon Johnson, James Robinson. And with Robinson, he authored The Economic Origins of Dictatorship and Democracy in 2006, and Why Nations Fail in 2012. That book, the latter, is an influential book on the role that institutions play in shaping nations' economic outcomes. This prompted wide scholarly and media commentary. He is described as a centrist. He believes, I'm told, in a regulated market economy. He regularly comments on political issues, economic inequality, and a variety of specific policies. He is, of course, a fellow of the United States National Academy of Sciences, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the Econometric Society, the European Economic Association, and other learned societies. Research Associate of the National Bureau of Economic Research and a Senior Fellow at the Canadian Institute of Advanced Research. Editor of Econometrica, an academic journal published by the Econometric Society from 2011 to 2015. He noted that most of his research has been motivated by trying to understand the sources of poverty. His research includes a wide range of topics, including political economy, human capital theory, growth theory, economic development, innovation, labor economics, income and age inequality, etc. I can see he's getting a bit restless, and for very good reason. He has no need to establish his academic credentials because he's invited by FirstBank, and we all know why he's here. We warmly welcome him, and I invite him now to come and deliver his lecture on the institutional impact on economic growth and the field of living.
Water here. I have a lot to talk about, so I need water. First of all, it's a great pleasure to be here. I have met wonderful hospitality in a very warm welcome in a very warm country, and I'm really cherishing this visit, and I thank the FirstBank for inviting me here and giving me an opportunity to talk to all of you. And I am particularly happy to be. And what I'm going to do is actually to combine three big strands of my research that I believe have important relevance for the future of the emerging world and the future of Nigeria. One of those is Why Nations Fail, which was part of my remit in this invitation to talk about. But I'm going to start actually with something else, with the prospects for the world economy in an age of automation, because it is a topic not only dear to my heart, but one that has been for too long ignored in the developing world because its implications are going to be sweeping. And then I will talk about how to tie that with the themes of Why Nations Fail. And then I will transition and talk about a new book that James Robinson and I are publishing, which will come out in a couple of months' time, which really links all of these themes and has quite a bit, I think, to tell us about where to go from here. So without further ado, I will get started, and I have some charts and markers that I'm going to show you as we go along. So I changed the title of the talk to high quality growth from the longer one that we had initially agreed. High quality growth, which of course I'm going to argue in a little bit, really needs to be embedded in inclusive institutions, is critical, has been critical for the developed world, and it will be more and more vital for the emerging world, especially countries such as Nigeria, to achieve. But it will also face some new and formidable challenges. And understanding what I mean by high quality growth and what those challenges are is really critical. So let me outline what I mean by high quality growth. Of course, it is economic growth. That's very important. We all know that in this room. But it is also economic growth based on employment growth, job creation. This is critical for the developed world. It is even more critical for the developing world. You can grow. Saudi Arabia, Russia, at some point Nigeria, and other countries grew based on oil. That's not enough. You really need to create jobs, both for shared prosperity and for bringing the whole society together. And employment growth is not enough either. You really need growth of wages and earnings for all groups in society. For women and men, for different regions, and for different education groups. And the third element of high quality economic growth is that in this modern world, in this modern economy, health and education have become imperatives. So it has to be growth that simultaneously invests in and exploits the human capital of the people to the fullest, which means you have to keep on investing in education and health, something that's quite lacking in many countries in the developing world, including Nigeria. All of these are going to be made feasible only if you have productivity growth, meaning if you can increase how efficiently and effectively you use your resources. So the issue of high quality growth is intimately linked to productivity growth and how we use those productivity gains for investing in the people, and how we create jobs for the future. But perhaps not enough recognized on the African continent and many other parts of the world. The barriers ahead of high quality growth have become much more formidable. They are led by changes in the nature of technology, which I'm going to put under the rubric of automation. That's what I'm going to spend a bit of time first. In that context, I will show you why, in fact, high quality growth has been absent in the developed world. That the last 25 years have been remarkable in lack of high quality growth in the US, underpinning some of the problems that the US is facing right now. And that those wins are actually very relevant for the developing world. Then I will talk about international institutional slot and why inclusive institutions, and in particular democracy, is key for high quality growth, but why it's suffering and the challenges that that poses for countries such as Nigeria. And then I will briefly talk about the international dimension, briefly, because I really don't want to overstay my welcome. I have so much to talk about. But also because we have a panel, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the international dimension on the panel. So I invite you to please ask me more about the international dimension in the context of the panel, because I'm not going to have time to talk about everything I want to say on that one. Actually, there are two very different narratives if you read the business pages of newspapers in the US or in Europe, you will hear the challenges and the difficulties and the failures I will talk about are not emphasized enough. Rather, you hear things such as this. Ray Kurzweil is the chief scientist and engineer of Google and has been one of the many voices heralding the dawn of a new bright age of machines that are so productive. So he says artificial intelligence will reach human capabilities, do everything that humans can do by 2029. Actually, he had originally said 2020, but he pushed it forward. And then a billionfold, bringing an age of such plenty that we haven't ever even come too close to experience. If we are really in the midst of such plentifulness, we should be so happy. We can feed everybody. Poverty can end. You can invest in as much education and health you want to have. All around the world, not just in the US. But of course, this is fantasy. Reality is very different. Reality is very different because high quality growth, as I will show you, has become much harder. And let me illustrate that with the US first. This is productivity growth in the US, what economists call total factor productivity growth. It is an important concept and I want to emphasize it for 30 seconds. This answers the following question, very simple. If next year you have exactly the same labor, the same human capital and the same capital that you have, but just improve your technology, how much more gross domestic product, how much more goods and services can you produce? And in the 50s, 60s, 70s, the US economy achieved remarkable total factor productivity growth. In the 50s, for example, it was over 3%. So if you did nothing else, you did not invest more and you did not build more human capital in the US, you would still produce 3% more every year because we are becoming so much more efficient. And that efficiency is really the heart of high productivity growth. That efficiency is what every country, developed or developing, has to strive for, because that's where the origins of riches lie. I'm going to talk about this over and over again in the next 45 minutes or so. But look at it, the white bar. Since the 1980s, the US economy has been failing to achieve anything close to what it used to do in terms of total factor productivity growth. Productivity growth has been slow, and it has had major implications. This is what high quality growth looks like in the US between 1947 and 1987. What I'm showing you is what happens to total payments to labor, both employment and wages. Think of it as the employment level times the average wage. And its growth is remarkable, about 3% a year, or per capita about 2% a year. Every year employers paid more, and in a very steady manner, a little bit of wiggle, recessions and everything. But employers wanted more labor, employed more labor, paid more labor. This is how high quality growth looks like. But look at what it looks, the same thing from 1987 onward. First it slows down, anemically growth. And then since 2000, way before the Great Recession, nothing to do with the financial crisis at all, it stops. Employers are not paying more to labor. They're not employing more, they're not paying more. And of course, we can unpack that. This is the employment rate of prime age workers in the US. From 1980 onwards, you see that huge increase? That's women. That's employment for all. Women are coming more and more into the labor force. The US economy is really growing by exploiting more of its capabilities. But then look at it, what happens from 2000 onwards. It declines, again, way before the Great Recession. Women's growth of labor force stops, That's a big problem because the U.S. has not reached the, say, Scandinavian or levels of women's employment yet. And men leave the labor force. These are men between the ages of 25 and 54. They should all be working. They're not working anymore. From 95% just down to the low 80s. But this is even more telling about what I mean by high quality growth, and something very important for the developing world to remember. I'm showing real wages. This is for men, but the women looks very similar, but I wanted to separate it and just one chart is enough. This is for men, for 5 different education units. Starting in 1963. The light blue in the middle, those are college graduates. The red are those with less than high school education, and the dark blue at the top, those are the postgraduates, people with masters and PhDs, for example, or professional degrees. Look at it from the 1960s, and this goes back similar, from the 1960s to the mid-70s. All 5 of these, high school graduates, high school dropouts, workers with 2 years of college, 4 years of college, postgraduate degrees, they're all growing together. This is the tide that lifts all boats. That is high quality growth. Everybody's wages is increasing at the same time. But then, look at how the picture changes from 80s onwards. Even the college graduates, the light blue figure, you know, in a country in Africa, college graduates, you know, we would love to have more of them. That's a blessing for the human capital of the workforce. But even the college graduates, they're not seeing much of a wage growth. And if today in the US, you are a high school graduate, man, and your father was a high school graduate man, 30 years ago, your father would have earned 30% more in real terms than you do. That is a telltale sign of low quality growth. And this is not unique to the US, we'll see. Wage growth has been very slow and it's been very uneven. Inequality has increased and has left many, many people, the majority of Americans, behind. Why? We get a little bit of a sense of it by looking at what's going on with occupation. The yellow bars are there in the middle. Those are the factory workers, clerical workers, the middle class of America. If you wanted to ask, where does the middle class reside? It would have been in the heartland of the US and in occupations on factory floors and in offices. And those are the occupations that are disappearing both for college graduates and for men and women of less than college. This is a large part of the reason. This is what factory floors look like in many parts of the world today. This is a car factory. If you went there 25 years ago, you would have seen bustling with people screwing in, attaching, assembling, painting, checking, verifying parts of the car. That's gone. What you don't see on the factory floor are people. You have industrial robots. And the occupations that I just showed you that have disappeared are exactly those where industrial automation and office automation have made the greatest strides, as I will show you in a second. And artificial intelligence, though it is not achieving what Ray Kurzweil said, it has not multiplied our productivity, and certainly it's not going to replace humans by 2029, nothing close to it. But it is the next phase of this automation. Now, at this point, you may ask several questions. Are these all related? What's the evidence? Even if they are, why is that relevant to the developing world? And how does it really integrate with the institutions that I've already emphasized. And I will try to answer those questions now. First, it is not just for the US. This is all around us. Look at the same chart that I just showed you for the US with the occupations. Now I'm showing you for all of the OECD. And in every OECD country, you see the same thing. The middle class occupations have been disappearing. Those red bars are going down. The last 20 years have witnessed the disappearance of factory floor jobs and clerical jobs in offices. But perhaps you'll say, this is just a developed world phenomenon. Why do we have to worry about this in Nigeria? There are no industrial robots in Nigeria. But first of all, they're not too far. They are all around the world. But secondly, even for countries that are not adopting the industrial robots, the implications are very deep and major. This map of the world is colored with the distribution of robots around the world. Unfortunately, very little data for Africa, but we know very little data reflects that industrial robots have not made big inroads. But look at it around much of the world. You see that they've spread way beyond the developing world. In fact, the US is not even a leader. The darkest colors are Germany, Japan, and South Korea. And that reflects another major thing, which perhaps I don't have time right now, but if people want to pick up on during the discussion, I would gladly talk a lot about, because that's yet another aspect that I've spent a lot of time thinking and writing about, demographic change. The developed world is aging, with major implications, and the developing world isn't. And this has created a huge set of opportunities and challenges for the next 20 years that are also important to be aware of. But unfortunately, I'm not going to have time to talk about that. But the other reason that all of this automation is first order relevant for Nigeria and for the emerging world is that even if you don't adopt robots yourself, the fact that the world does means the game has changed. Mexico is a case in point. North of Mexico boomed for 30 years because they became integrated as part of the supply chain of US manufacturing. And then the last 15 years, all of those jobs have been disappearing because as automation goes on in the US, those jobs come back. So the growth path that Taiwan, South Korea, later China, Malaysia have followed, start by using your low-cost advantage in manufacturing. That is not going to be open to countries anymore in the age of automation. And that has major implications for why education and health and productivity growth are going to be even more critical for the developing world, for the challenges that Nigeria will face and will have to succeed in the next 25 years. You might say, but really, what do we know that this process of automation is really at the root of this very complex changes in employment, wages, occupations? Well, this is stuff I have done quite a bit of work investigating, and I'll just summarize it with one chart, just humor me. This is what happened in the US as robots got adopted in different parts of the US. And on the vertical axis, you have wages. And on the horizontal axis, you have the extent of robotization in the local labor market. And you see what's going on. The places that have adopted more robots, they have seen the lower wage growth. It's places like Detroit, Wilmington, Defiance City, Ohio. Those are the industrial heartland where auto manufacturing, electronics, metalworks are. All of those sectors you see being completely transformed. And that means a very different world for countries that are going to get to this stage in the next 20 years. a sweeping set of changes that we have to be aware of. But how can we prepare ourselves for that? There's only one answer to that, and it is about institutions. But before I go there, let me also try to dispel one other set of incorrect narratives about robots. When people see the research that shows how automation has changed the landscape, one conclusion that they jump to is to say, oh my God, the world has changed, the end of work has come. There will not be work for anybody. Robots and artificial intelligence will do all the work, and we're doomed. So from the euphorically optimistic type of narrative that you hear from Silicon Valley, you come to the other extreme that is doomed for the developed and the developing world as machines take over everything. But that also misses the point. It misses the point because it misunderstands technology. And it misses the point because it misunderstands history. Automation is about the substitution of machines for human labor, which is a major, not only, but a major driver of economic growth. The British Industrial Revolution started with automation. The advances in weaving and spinning that mechanized production were all about automation. And mechanization of agriculture, something that the developing world unfortunately has lagged behind, is also automation. But none of these waves of automation have brought doom. They have brought difficulties and they have brought hardship. But in many instances, we have found ways of turning that technology around to make it work for ourselves. And let me give you one little illustration of that from the mechanization of agriculture in the US, because I think it's actually quite relevant for the future challenges that the developing world will face. So starting in 1850 with mechanical plows and then tractors and other machinery, agriculture became mechanized, hugely mechanized. Its share in GDP dropped, its share in employment dropped very sharply. Americans at the beginning of the 19th century were farmers. 70% were working in agriculture. By 1930, there were few farmers left. Agriculture became completely capital intensive. You know, you think of agriculture as manual labor. It played a role, but today, if you go to Europe, if you go to the US, and this is the same in the middle of the 20th century, labor plays very little role in agriculture. The share of labor in agriculture is actually the lowest of all the other sectors. But you know, what happened? The left figure. What happens that as labor left agriculture, the rest of the economy also changed. Industry, factory floor jobs and services and trade, they started expanding, creating new tasks, new occupations, new industry. And at the same time as labor was being freed from agriculture, those sectors started expanding, taking that labor in and employing it even more productively than it used to do in agriculture. How much of the revenue or the value added goes to labor? That drops sharply, that's the red curve there, in agriculture, but at the same time you see it increase in industry. None of this was before a lot of hardship befell many Americans. You know, you read the books of John Steinbeck. They were real. They showed all the difficulties that many people face. So it wasn't shared prosperity at first. But society found, with the ingenuity of entrepreneurs and the support of government, it found ways of turning technology around to work for the people more broadly. And one important ingredient, and without that it would not have been possible to do that blue rising up and soaking all the labor and creating the foundation of shared prosperity. Human capital. The people who were employed in industry, in services, they were clerks, they were factory floor workers, they were much more educated than the agricultural. And that was made feasible because around that time, starting in the end of the 19th century, US started one of the biggest drives to increase human capital. High schools were spread all around the country. And it was those high school graduates who eagerly grabbed these new jobs and transformed them. Health and education. Perhaps you could have done it in the beginning of the 19th century, it was agriculture, but not even in the beginning of the 20th century, and certainly not in the 21st century. So now, we come to how is it that societies make way for technology to really unleash its capacity for becoming the tide that lifts all boats. And that's where institutions are key. High quality growth is only feasible with inclusive institutions. Inclusive institutions that invest in health and human capital, that create a legal environment that treats people equally, that creates opportunities for everybody, that protects people in the law, that does not enshrine privilege and hierarchy. And all of those need to have political just democracy. They're much more than democracy. And there are ways of making democracy work, and there are ways of making democracy fail. But democracy, people having a voice, is a critical element of that. It's one, but critical element. And I want to focus on that aspect of inclusive institutions, though, of course, if I had time, I would have talked much more about other aspects of inclusive institutions too. And I want to talk about democracy for three reasons. One is that it is imperfect but still critical. Second is that it is under renewed attack, and the nature of its benefits are underappreciated and belittled. A big, big mistake that I want to act as a partial corrective to. But let me start with the attack on democracy. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, there was a renewed optimism about how the whole world would become democratic. Many people jumped on that bandwagon, but no one as enthusiastically as Stanford political scientist Francis Fukuyama, who wrote a book, or read an article, entitled The End of History, followed by a book with the same title. He said this is the age of the unabashed victory of economic and political liberalism. By political liberalism, he meant democracy as opposed to socialist politics, and economic liberalism, he meant the market. And indeed, as his advisor and eminent political scientist Samuel Huntington also emphasized, with the third wave, there was a wave of democracy spreading around the world, including in Africa, especially in Latin America, South Europe, parts of Asia. But look at it today. This data is directly from the Freedom House report of the last year, or this year. According to the Freedom House, the last 12 years, the number of countries where democratic institutions and respectful civil rights and civil liberties has gone back every year, has exceeded those in which there has been improvement. This does not look like the age of democracy or the end of history. It looks like the retrenchment, slide of democracy. But then the narrative continues. Democracy is problematic. In this day and age, perhaps you need firm leadership. You need leaders who impose their will, make the right policy choices, and avoid the hurly-burly of democracy. In China, in Africa, you hear that rhetoric a lot. Even in the US nowadays, you hear that rhetoric a lot. China, Russia, they are acting more and more like role models for many countries. And it is actually, I'll come back to that in a second, it is part of the international strategy of dictatorships to help create kindred spirits, a block of non-democracy. So the story goes, yes, democracy is something that you may want to enjoy, but it's become more costly. If you want economic success, don't go down the path of democracy, especially for developing countries. I want to argue that that's wrong. That's very wrong. In fact, the data speak very loudly on this point. They speak so loudly that I'm just going to show you the data. That's it. That's the data. What this is, I'll tell you, it's very easy. I've taken every country, every year, from 1950 to 2015, and classified them as democracies or non-democracies. The year when a non-democracy becomes a democracy, that's year zero. And then I plot their GDP per capita, how much goods and services they're producing, relative to other countries in that year. So this is like a transparent summary of what goes on around democratization. Zero is where you democratize. There are two things in this figure that are particularly noteworthy. One is that, look at countries just before zero. That's that big slide down. The big cliff. There's a reason for that. Non-democracies don't go away peacefully and out of their own volition. The Chinese Communist Party or Putin in Russia, or military dictatorships in West Africa or the rest of Africa, they don't go by saying, okay, we've had enough. We think democracy is going to be much better, we'll just put ourselves out of the way. No, they go when they lose legitimacy, when the opposition to them mounts, and that happens most strongly and forcefully in the middle of recession. Dictatorships typically fall when their mismanagement of the economy becomes so overwhelming that the economy tanks. That's a big drop. And then they have no choice, but in the face of the demands from society, they make way for something else, typically democracy, but sometimes under dictatorship. But the second point is much more important for, if there's going to be another second takeaway from my talk, this figure is it. After a few years, those that democratize start growing faster. And by the end of about 25 years itself, even if you don't fix the rest of the institution, it brings enough dividends of 25%. That's a huge change. It's not going to make Nigeria Switzerland. But it is the first step. Then build on it with other institutions and it changes. And why does democracy bring this growth? It's actually important to understand that. There are a couple of things. The first is that democracy brings productivity improvements. And it does so because it's actually better at getting rid of the worst regulations, those that create oligarchies and monopolies and corruption, than dictatorships. Second, democracy does one thing that its opponents really don't like. It raises taxes. Tax revenue, and I will come back to this. Tax revenue is a lifeblood for developing countries. Developing countries need infrastructure. They need education. They need health. Those are not cheap. But if the government doesn't have legitimacy, if it doesn't want to tax its cronies, and if it cannot overcome informality and illegality, that it cannot raise taxes, it will not have the revenues to do that. You need a social pact to increase taxes. And those taxes are then going to be the lifeblood for future growth. And in fact, what democracies do typically, there are exceptions, but typically what they do is that they raise taxes and they invest those things in education and health. I can show you the education picture, but to keep the story moving, let me just show you health. Exactly the same figure. 0 is at democratization, but now what I'm showing you is infant mortality, a perennial problem in Africa. Life expectancy has become so much longer in Africa, but infant mortality is still a big issue. And you see what happens to infant mortality after democracy. It's like a huge-scale health program. It's like an amazing decline in health, infant mortality after democracy. Why? Because once you democratize, you start spending on health services in parts of the countries that were completely ignored by non-democratic regimes. So much of a good thing. Why aren't we all democratic? Why aren't we embracing it around the world? Well, many reasons. First of all, not everybody loves democracy. If you are the Chinese Communist Party or a military dictator in Africa or Latin America, you don't love democracy. Democracy means your privileges are taken away from you. If you're a crony of one of such persons, you also don't like it. But there are other barriers. So Fukuyama in '89 predicted that it was the end of history, democracy's path was clear. That turned out to be wrong. Then in the 2000s, people predicted that democracy's path was going to be supercharged because the internet, blogs, wikis, Twitter and social media, they were going to democratize communication. That we were all going to be so openly talking to each other that democracy was going to get a powerful new wind. But today, people have become more pessimistic about technology and democracy. So many, just pick on one, Israeli social scientist Yuval Noah Harari, have argued that new technologies love dictatorships. They have an affinity to dictatorships. And if you look at Tiananmen Square with the face recognition software everywhere, so that nobody can protest that, you think, how can I disagree with that? Well, it's actually much worse in the Uyghur province, where the 1 million Muslims in China are in re-education camps, forced labor camps. Everywhere is filled with face recognition problem, but I don't have a picture of it because nobody can take pictures. And China is at the beginning of implementing a social credit system, which is only made feasible by the amazing ability of technology to keep track of everything you do. The social credit system means that for every opinion and every activity that the state or the Communist Party disapproves of, you lose your credit. And if you lose your credit, you cannot get good apartments, you cannot get into good schools, you cannot get good jobs. Only choice left for you is to prostrate in front of the state. So perhaps we are leading to an age of new technology-created dictatorships, and good or bad, democracy is going to have a much harder time. And look around in the US, democracy is going through a rough patch. The Philippines, Brazil, and perhaps it will come to sub-Saharan Africa, where democracy has had a rejuvenation. Certainly the Arab Spring didn't work out in the north of Africa. But I will argue that this is not the right way to think about it. And this is where I'm going to link now to the new book that James and Robinson and I will publish in a couple of months in September. And I want to summarize that to you with just one figure, and then link it to the context of technology, credit, employment, and institutions. And this is this one figure. Now this looks abstract, but I'm going to spend 5 minutes on this because I think if I can communicate this to you, if I can help you think about the world a little differently through the lenses of this framework, I would be so happy. So on the horizontal axis there, I have the capabilities of society. And on the vertical axis, I have the power of the state. And in the middle there is a little narrow corridor. That narrow corridor is characterized by two things. It's characterized by a balance of power between state and society. Neither society is prostrate in front of the state, nor does the state relinquish its responsibilities, its capacity, its ability to enforce law, to use its expertise through bureaucracy, to invest in education and health. It's only in that narrow corridor. And in that narrow corridor, you see very different dynamics. Dynamics where we keep on building the capacity of the state. Reduce corruption, increase expertise, increase the ability of the state to deliver the services and the social insurance that are critical in this 21st century. While society keeps up with it. You don't see that when the state is weak and absent. And you don't see that when the state is despotic like in China. Now, the narrative that you need a strong state, you need the iron will of a leader that imposes choices, that often comes from comparing societies that are in chaotic situations down there where the state is absent to places like China or Rwanda. You know, Lagos in the early 1990s with the area boys, that's in that area where the state is absent. Civil war, that's in that area. Lebanon is in that area. Of course, if I compare that to the order that the Chinese Communist Party brings, I love that order relative to the area boys. But that's not the only choice. The choice is the corridor. And if you are in the corridor, you use technology differently, you use credit differently, you use institutions differently. So why not move into the corridor? Why doesn't everybody move into the corridor? Actually, that's a very interesting question, and it's a deep one. And understanding and thinking about that a little bit will help us really appreciate what the future, what the promise of the future, and what the challenges of the future are. And in fact, moving in the corridor has been rare. Most of humanity has been on the lower left-hand side, just like the area was. Most of history of Africa, where humanity originated, they were stateless bands. Most of pre-Middle Ages civilizations, everywhere in Europe, certainly Asia, there were a lot of this countries, societies without states. They have been very long-lived. Why not build a state with all the benefits that it brings? Well, actually, there's a good reason for that. Because if you start building the state, there's no guarantee that you can control it. And if you cannot control it, it will tell you what to do, it will repress you, it will put you to work as forced labor. And that fear has become a critical part of human DNA. We are programmed to seek liberty because we don't want other people to tell us what to do. And I'm going to give you an example from Nigeria. Tivland. And you know what's special about Tivland is that it's not special. It's just like many, many, many other stateless societies that have existed through the ages, and archaeologists have documented. But what's special about Tivland is that we know much more about it because a couple of anthropologists, a husband and wife team, the Bohanas, went and lived there for 2 decades and have documented how TIV politics and how TIV society works. And it's fascinating. For those of you who haven't read it, read it. It's extremely instructive. But I will summarize it in 2 sentences. And the 2 sentences are no hierarchy. Everything in TIV society was about no hierarchy. Norms were all organized around bringing down anybody who became politically powerful, especially politically powerful, who could start telling other people what to do, and economically powerful. The whole economic institutions of the TIV were about preventing trade, because if you trade, somebody may become richer than others. And once you become richer, what is there to stop you to tell others what to do? If you became powerful, if you became rich, the TIV norms said that you were a witch. You build your power by eating the hearts of other people. You were most likely accountable, you had to be brought down. In a situation like that, that suspicion of power meant that it was very difficult to build a state, go without any education, any human capital, any organization, even though the TIV occupied a very large area and engaged in agriculture as well as hunting and gathering. And at the time the British came, the TIV was probably one of the poorest parts of Africa because of this complete lack of any state institutions. But what the TIV had wasn't an anachronistic, special Central African type of suspicion of power. That suspicion of power is the same everywhere. The TIV remind me of another people that have been studied very well. The Greeks, the ancient Greeks, the birthplace of democratic civilization. They also had the same TIV-like suspicion of power. Hierarchy, you had to fight against it. You had to control it, you had to bring down those who were getting too big for their boots. But the way that Greeks did that was very different. They found a way of institutionalizing. Don't stop the state from forming. Let the state form, but control it. Control those controlling power. Control the politicians. Control the rich. And one of those institutions that they developed many, and it's fascinating that I don't have time, but the most important ones that they developed were about democratic institutions, parliaments, monitoring systems, mass politics, societal mobilization. But one of them is really interesting. It's the institution of ostracism. Ostracism, the word ostracism comes from the word ostrakon, shards of pottery, that the Greeks wrote the names of a famous person on shards of pottery. And that person, whoever was getting too big for his boots and becoming too powerful and bossing other people around, he would be exiled for 10 years. And this is the ostracism of Themistocles. Themistocles was the greatest hero that the Greeks have ever had. He defeated the Persians. He single-handedly built the navy when other people did not realize the importance of the navy. He led the navy against the Persians, and then he realized the threat that the Spartans posed. But at some point he was becoming so powerful that the Greeks decided to ostracize him and send him out of Athens. They also had a hubris law. It was illegal in ancient Greece to be hubristic towards others. So even slaves, if you went and started bossing people around, you could be jailed, and some people were even executed for being hubristic. That suspicion of power was then the key to build institutions to control the state. And the more they controlled the state, the more they built it. The services that the Greeks started providing around 5th century BC are amazing. They had a social insurance system. They had coins that were circulated by the government. They started regulating competition. They had orphanages. They had a huge road network, and they had huge public good programs. And they were all made feasible because they wanted to build the state, but then control it. And the key of that is that, like in that corridor, contested power is greater power. It's not true that if you want to build a better state, you have to follow the Chinese path. If you want to build a better state, two things are much more important than the iron will of a dictator or an authoritarian leader. One is getting society involved so that society monitors what the politicians are doing, so that corruption doesn't creep in, crazy ideas don't creep in, and you can kick out leaders, term-limited leaders who will not become lifelong presidents or military dictators. And the second is the cooperation of societies. The state cannot enter every nook and cranny of society and provide the services, insurance, health, education, unless society cooperates. And that cooperation requires trust. And that trust requires society to give its consent to the state. And that consent to be earned so that the state delivers services, and then that builds this trust. You don't solve security problems by selling bigger and bigger arms. You solve security problems by cooperating with society. And that really is critical about how to use technologies. There's nothing about AI or those face recognition cameras that says that they have to be tools of dictatorship. We decide how to use them, and that depends on this balance of power between state and society. Whether you are in the corridor, whether the state is absent, weak, and ineffective, or whether you are under a despotic state. One of the most important pieces in political science about states goes back to political scientist Charles Tilley. It's what every political science graduate student, some undergraduates, learn. States make war and war makes the state. And in fact, it has been applied to Africa. People have said, you know why Africa is so weak and so problematic? They haven't had enough wars. Crap. It's crap because it really doesn't take into account the fact that where you strengthen the state really means completely different things. If you're strengthening the state, starting from an area where you have a chance to enter the corridor, that's great. But if you are in the corridor and you further strengthen the state, that takes you out of the corridor into the orbit of despotism. Where you are for shocks, for wars, for technologies, it matters. And it matters for employment. You know, in the same way that AI doesn't mean dictatorship, it doesn't mean democracy. It means what we do with it. So does other technology. Robots don't mean loss of jobs. Robots are a platform. AI is a platform. Every society has to benefit from it and has to decide how to use it. Credit and finance. I am lucky to be here in the Mecca of West Africa's financial hub. And finance can be a powerful, revitalizing force for economic development. Entrepreneurship, consumer credit, access to resources for everybody. That is the heart of some of the problems that West Africa and Africa in general will have to solve. But again, it is society's choice how to use those financial tools. During the age of the high-quality growth, financial intermediation in the US expanded rapidly, and providing access to many, many more credits and businesses in a way that wasn't feasible. It wasn't all equal, it wasn't all perfect. You know, when mortgages boomed in the 50s and the 60s, there was redlining that discriminated against African Americans in the US. It wasn't all hunky-dory, but it was broad-based. But then you have the 2000s, where finance becomes high-tech finance, very closely related between governments and Wall Street, and huge risk-taking and risky financial derivatives. That's a failure of using the financial tools in the same way that we don't use the technological tools. So what I'm saying is that for all of the platforms, from finance to technology to employment creating new machines, and to many, many more, It's really our control. And it's how we combine the state's capabilities and expertise and how we build it, how we use it, and how society keeps it in check. So history isn't destiny. History matters. You cannot erase your history. But history isn't destiny. We make it. We make our own destiny. And society's involvement and the best way in that corridor through democratic means is important. And I think there's no way better to come back to Lagos. And Governor Minister Fashola is here. And this is from Lagos, I think under your government. Area boys are nowhere to be seen in Lagos. And Lagos collects much more taxes. Why? It wasn't because, I think, my understanding, you can correct me if I'm wrong, please. It wasn't because you brought your iron hand and said everybody's going to pay their taxes, otherwise the rifles will come out. It was a pact with society. I will collect more taxes and I will provide services. Trust me, I will provide services. That's what needs to be done. Everywhere in Nigeria, everywhere in West Africa, everywhere. It's in that corridor. The more the state does, the more it is responsible to be monitored, to be accountable, and to be at the service of the people. The more responsibility on the people to keep that state, that those politicians in check, even when they are well-meaning. But Nigeria isn't an island. We live in an international world. But it's the same lesson, my last lesson. The international dimension is also for us to decide how to use. Of course, I'm aware, I'm not completely unaware. Nigeria has a painful history of colonialism, foreign interventions, imperialism, slave trade, everything. That is an example of not taking from the international community being allowed to impose its worst part on a country. But it's no different today. You can decide to follow investments made on unequal terms. You can decide to follow advice to strengthen the military, weaken democracy. Or you can decide to take the international dimension in the way that it comes best for the country. And again, society has to decide. That means, in my opinion, take technology. Technology is key. Productivity growth comes from technology. Nigeria cannot realize its potential in the next 25 years in the same way that it has started making progress unless technology improves. And that technology is going to come from growth. It's going to come with foreign capital. It's going to come with joint ventures and technical expertise. It means take investment from every country, but on your own terms. Don't let China dictate it. Don't let China tell you what to do. And it also means, and this is very important, take criticism. Take criticism. Take criticism. Not every international reaction to Nigeria is because Europeans or Americans or others are becoming imperialistic again. Turkey, the country where I was born, went off the rails because when Europeans started criticizing its lack of progress on human rights, they said, no, we're going to defend ourselves and we're going to battle down. And it was hell. Take criticism. If the international community, if Amnesty International, if Transparency International says there is corruption here, don't dismiss it, take it up to heart. Because to deal with corruption is very essential to build that trust. Build that trust, build that expertise, then you can start collecting more taxes, using them in the right expertise, and investing in health and education for high quality growth. Thank you.
Wonderful appreciation of the lecture of our guest, Professor Darren Asemogu. Learning and development, the visions to come forward, to receive a copy. So no need to go to some. Thank you very much. With what I write, head coverage and corporate banking at the Quest, I owe duty in recommending the Chartered Institute of Bankers of Nigeria, the Group Head for Finance and Corporate Services, Afolabi Mokede, Senior Special Assistant on Job Creation and Youth Employment. You all come up, please. And last and certainly not least, Chief Chris Okuno, the legal practitioner and vice president of the Institute of Directors. I know his work. Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it gives me a very quick opportunity to recognize the contribution of women in FirstBank. The FirstBank is an equal opportunities employer, a great meritocracy, and that is especially exemplified by them having a woman as their chairman. The chairman of FirstBank of Nigeria, PLC, Washington. Acknowledge her and all the women who represent. I hesitate to use the word powerful after that lecture, but maybe the word strong is entirely appropriate. Thank you very much. We have our plenary session now, and the guest speaker is already seated. I'd like to invite up those who will be participating with him in this short session. The moderator this morning is going to be Dr. Joy Salami. Dr. Joy Salami is a Nigerian economist, currently managing director of Kainos Edge Consulting Limited, previously a member of the Monetary Policy Commission of Central Bank, and senior fellow at the Lagos Business School. Mrs. Emma Essien, Country Managing Director of the IFC. One of those strong women, legal team. Country Manager for IFC, Nigeria Office, and a former Senior Associate Director of the Rockefeller Foundation, an experienced development finance professional who demonstrates a history of effective team leadership resulting in measurable outcomes. She's skilled in emerging markets, finance, corporate governance, impact, investment, business development, strategic planning, diversity and inclusion, an advocate of organizational health as the most significant driver in achieving sustainability and environmental impact. You're very welcome. Next is Mr. Uche Oji, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority.
The last seat.
And may I also now invite up Mr. George Gian Gaffor, the Honorable Minister for Budget and Planning of Ghana. Now, in introducing himself, I'm minded to let everyone know that you're in fact representing the President of Ghana this morning. But in your own right, for this plenary session, I'm pretty sure you have left the toga of the President behind you temporarily to take part in this plenary session. You're very welcome, sir. Next, we have Mrs. Zainab Ahmed, the Honorable Minister of Finance and Law, similarly representing the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, President Muhammad Buhari. But once again, at least as far as the plenary session goes, her opinions are all her own. I'm not that of the President, I think. Thank you very much. I'd like to hand you over now to Mr. Dr. Doyin Salam. The microphone.
Right, thank you very much indeed. The closing parts of Darren's keynote address dealt with the international environment and how Nigeria and Africa should engage. Now, when you look at Africa, roughly 1.2 billion people, income almost $2.5 trillion in 2018. Interesting. But then the Africa's story, if you go back 10, 15 years, it was about Africa rising. In more recent years, and so the challenge is how do we restore this, especially given a context where it would appear that Africa appears to be fearful of its engagement with the global community. Africa appears to be fearful of international capital. On what terms should it engage? Horror stories around Chinese involvement in Africa abound. And yet, Africa does require significant capital injections if she is to move. Let me use Nigeria as example, and I crave the indulgence of the Honorable Minister. That when you look, Nigeria's infrastructure master plan requires us as a country to spend $100 billion every year for 3 decades in order to expand, upgrade infrastructure to levels that make us globally competitive. Now, we haven't been spending money in that proportion at all. And so, it raises, how do we deal with this dilemma? We need to spend money, we need to build investments, and yet we appear to be afraid of the dynamics of international relationships, especially economic ones. So this panel, in my view, has to try and, shall we say, square that circle. How do we get to this? Let me create the indulgence to start with public policy makers, both from Nigeria and also from Ghana. And perhaps pose the question to you, from your own reading, as Finance Minister, as Minister for Budget and Planning, how do you see this whole global interdependence? What role do you see as you plan your policy agenda? How can global environment, global economy, international capital perhaps, how do you see that helping the two countries that you currently are responsible for public policy. Perhaps if we ladies first, Honorable Minister.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wilson. Let me say good morning to Excellencies and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. The global interdependence is both an opportunity as well as a threat for us in Africa. There are a lot of risks. Some of the risks are within our control, some are not. And we've gone through several cycles of, in Nigeria, at least booms and busts as well as globally. And we have not yet adequately learned the lessons that we need to learn. We must, as government, ensure that we're able to build fiscal purpose, and also that we are providing enough policy incentives that would attract capital, both locally as well as overseas. And we're not averse to FDIs coming in, but we would prefer to have real investments coming into the country. So whatever we need to do in terms of policy, we will do. The infrastructure deficit we have is too large for this government or any government in Nigeria to do generate. So we must partner with the private sector. We must enable private capital coming to use its resources to help develop our economy. We must do more than we're doing now in terms of enabling the business environment, improving security, both physical security as well as security of capital, so that when investors choose to come to Nigeria, they're comfortable enough that their investment will grow, will flourish, and they can bring their monies in and take it out at their own convenience. So we must learn from the mistakes that we have. Some of the things we did in the past that have scared away investors. We must make sure we don't do those things again. We must make sure that critical sectors like the power sector, we evolve to prices that are market leading prices, because that's what we need in investment. We also make sure that the present realities that we live in, that we accelerate fiscal buffers, that we invest when we have plenty, and even when we don't have, we have a system to make sure that investment is done on a consistent basis. In Africa, and also in Nigeria, we have a unique opportunity that we have pretty good financial system, and that is a huge opportunity for us in Nigeria. The local banking industry in Nigeria has been champions in Africa. We've seen the financial system provide a good buffer in the crisis of 2007-2008. Because our banks were strong, they had good capital base, the shock that went through Nigeria was not as bad as other countries experienced. And we also are proud of banks like the FirstBank that are representing us well across several regions. So we help us back today, not just in Nigeria, not just in West Africa and Africa, but in other continents of the world. That is really something we should all be proud of. And we want to urge FirstBank, we know you're a bank that is driven by innovation, by technology, but we need to do more because we have a life society that is still excluded financially. So we need to use technology, automation, like our speaker said, to be able to enhance the financial inclusivity in our country. And the government, in its own part, will just need to work with the financial system to provide the policies that you require to enable you cover more Nigerians. We also need to look at how we can tax technology. There are so many transactions that happen now across the world, including in our country, that we're not getting any benefits from in terms of taxes. So working with the financial sector, government will, using technology, take advantage of the demographic that we have. We have a large population, largely young, which is a huge advantage for us. And using technology, we should be able to provide enough incentives to create more employment so that our youths are engaged. Let me stop here.
Well, before I go to a honorable minister from Ghana, let me just leave something for you to reflect on. I'll come back to this. You've spoken about quite a number of dimensions, but you laid emphasis on learning from some of the mistakes of the past that we have now. And you also alluded to the need to create an enabling environment, at least that ensures that capital finds Nigeria and indeed Africa as an interesting destination to come to. When I come back to you, it'd be interesting for us, I imagine, to try and understand, take enabling environment, some of the ideas that might be, that we should be looking forward to in terms of trying to expand or improve the environment. We know we've been doing that's been working assiduously in various dimensions. What else might we be looking forward to as the year unfolds? So, but sir, from Ghanaian experience, what's your own sense of how international global dependencies can catalyze Africa's ascendancy?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mr. Moderator, I'm here in the first place to give a good message to the bank and even on behalf of the Secretary of the President of the Republic of Ghana. I'm here this morning to stand in for the financing that we cannot make it in Lagos today. But in coming to your question, see, I think that there are three major areas that we have to focus on in terms of promoting global dependency. The first area is trade, international trade, then it includes some services. The second area is the international commercial capital flows, and then international mobility of labor. First of all, we regard to trade. The level statistics that I shared with you give us an indication that our problem is more of exporting and mostly in commodities and importing more in terms of other processed goods and services. In that way, what you see is that we are dependent upon the other one for these processed goods and services, whereas we are actually stuck in terms of raw material that we export. So then the question is, how do we leverage these resources that we have here in order for us to be able to impact on our economies? First, I think we need to add value to the raw material that we have on the continent. When you look at Nigeria, a lot of oil, but few petrochemical industries exist. When you look at Ghana, you have a lot of cocoa, a lot of diamonds, a lot of gold, but we export them all in raw. So the question is, what do we do so that this trade that we have with the rest of the world will actually help us move out of poverty? That is, I think, the focus that we have to look at when we're looking at the trade dimension of this interdependence. Because it looks like we are short-changed in terms of what we can do. And our economies are power. For instance, in Ghana recently we had difficulty with the exchange rate, and then the result was that the reason was simple, that the goods that we export are all controlled by Chicago and by London and in terms of prices. Whereas we really import everything that we consume in that country. That puts a strain on the foreign exchange, and then you see it actually moving way high in all directions. So that is one area that I think we need to add value to our raw materials to ensure that we take advantage of this interdependency, interrelatedness of the economies. Otherwise, we will be talking about it over and over and over again, and there will be not much that we can achieve. But then the other area is about capital flow. It's being believed that the resources that we have, the capital that we have, actually is outside the continent. It's almost higher than the GDP of any of these countries in every year. So there has to be a way of trying to make sure that we fight these illicit flows and use that kind of resources to build our economies and to ensure that people can have what they have to ask for. But then the third dimension of it, which probably is about, which the professor talked about, is about corruption. The state capture, the state at times become too powerful, and with that power is actually used to take the resources away from the people. And unless we are able to find a way to limit that resources to run the economies. And of course, when you're trying to take taxes from people, and you know that you are rather looting the money, taking the money out of the country, I don't think they will be happy giving you the taxes. So there has to be a way to let them know. I mean, as the professor was referring to, when you look at the diagonal, there is a balance between the state and the public. And that check should be there. Otherwise, all the trust that people have in governments will not really be there. So I think there is a need for us to make sure that we don't take over the state by maybe an iron hand, but allow the people to also have a voice in what they do.
Well, let me also add this on your desk so that when I come back, at least you have had a couple of moments to reflect on two things. You speak to the notion of adding value to raw materials. In my view, this is not rocket science, and we've spoken about this ad nauseam. So we know. So the key question for me then becomes, what is it that has stopped us from doing that thus far, and what do we need to do to remedy that position? Okay. Now, the second point that you raised about export of capital, sometimes easy seized, at other times actually very easy. And the question again that rises in my mind is we are not unfamiliar with this. We've seen this before, time and again. And so again, as a public policy maker, what in your own sense do we need to do as a continent that reverses these flows? In other words, because what you're speaking to is we are taking our capital out and expecting others to bring theirs in. And so the key question then should be how do we first of all at least stop that and then come back. So I'll leave you to ponder those two questions before I come back. then talked to one of our internationals. Well, she's one of our own, but at least she does lead the IFC's operations in Nigeria. What's your own experience, madam? As you lead the IFC's business in Nigeria, which essentially is investing in private companies across the world. What's your own sense of what might be stop this whole access by Africa to international cooperation as being catalytic of our growth?
Thank you for the question, Dr. Somali. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. It's a real pleasure. I just want to acknowledge the FirstBank of Nigeria family here, the board, the executive management team, the staff, and just congratulate them for 125 years of robust and visionary growth. And again, I think we should see another 125 years. I just wanted to make a note that one of the unique things about the Nigerian banking sector is that it is very homegrown in nature when you compare it to other African countries. And so the potential we have to make sure that the financial institutions here are speaking to the needs of Nigerians is incredible. So I'm a big believer that the banking sector in Nigeria can revolutionize the Nigerian economy. So thank you for FirstBank for leading that effort. So with respect to your question, I think there are a couple of things. I want to focus first on what I think is going right in terms of what needs to happen to ensure that there is sufficient capital coming into a country like Nigeria. I've seen quite a bit of positive change with respect to Nigerians investing in Nigeria, Nigerian money staying in Nigeria. I think there's more to be done, but there's certainly been a lot of positive moves in the right direction. I think NSIA, the work that they're doing is one example. There have been efforts to try and see how we can make sure that pension fund money is invested in long-term capital. So there's more and more of a desire on the part of Nigerian investors to invest in Nigeria for the long term. As an international investor, this is critical. We need to see people investing in their own country. And so the more and more we see that, the more and more we have more confidence that international funds in a country will be able to stay the course, will be able to have the desired impact. So I think that's a very positive development. And again, I think we're on the right path. We need to see more of that, but it's going in the right direction. So that I think is a positive. I think the challenge is, and this is something we talk about quite a bit, not just for Nigeria, but globally actually, is do we have sufficient alignment with policymakers on the necessary reform environment that will attract and maintain capital. So it's not enough to make a reform. One then has to stick to it and ensure that it's implemented and everybody follows the quote-unquote rules. That is a critical piece of this. And so when I can tell you, we spend a lot of time talking about this internally, when you have the opportunity to invest in a country where you see real advocacy, real commitment to a reform agenda, there's incredible enthusiasm about investing in that country, putting long-term capital in that country. All of us who invest long-term recognize that things change, situations change. So you can't expect that what happens today is going to be the same 10 years from now. So we understand that situations change. But it's also important to see that long-term commitment in the future going forward. So in the case of Nigeria, I think we have a bold vision around what can happen here, but the implementation has been a challenge. And so once we see more commitment to implementation to the long term, we'll see more capital coming into Nigeria. There is really no capital constraint from my perspective. I was telling the Honorable Minister when we met a couple of months ago that IFC, as the largest investor in the developing markets, we don't have a heavy constraint right now for Nigeria. We double our business in Nigeria with the right projects. So it's not money. That is not the challenge. The challenge is ensuring that when that money is invested in certain sectors, that you're going to have the requisite impact, the impact that you're expecting to see. That is the big challenge. And when that nut is cracked, then I can tell you that there'll be continued interest in investing in African countries. Nigeria is uniquely positioned to attract most of the FDI, the foreign direct investment, coming into the continent. Uniquely positioned to do that. So the only question mark really is, do we have the right reform environment and commitment to ensure that when that investment comes, it will have the desired impact? So from my perspective, I think this is more of a question of not a dearth of capital, but much more around, do we have alignment, sufficient alignment with policymakers and investors so that when we invest, we get the results, not just the returns, but the results that we're looking for. Thank you.
Right. Well, again, I will forgive. I will leave something for you to reflect upon before I come back. Essentially, what I hear you say is, at least from your perspective, you're clear about the issues and the role of global interdependence. It's fine. And it does work. And indeed, Nigeria should get more opportunities of taking advantage of some of these opportunities. Now, but at the beginning of your comments, you say, especially in commenting FirstBank, that Nigeria's bank is home. What do you see about trying to expand on the inclusiveness of Nigeria's financial arrangements? If I put this on the table for you, BVN, which is that unique identifier of bankers, 40 million thereabouts, 110 million an ounce, something like that. But of these 40 million, last time I saw it, probably about a year ago, 100 of these 40 million are responsible for almost half of all the borrowing. Now, that in my view creates a challenge about access and inclusiveness, which in themselves creates a loosening of societal fabric and therefore creates a challenge to international investors of any kind coming. So it will be interesting for me to get your reflections on what might be useful to ease that kind of concern. Right, you will forgive me that I come to you last. It's not because you are farthest away from you, but that kind of happens. Now, you run what we colloquially call the sovereign wealth fund. Again, reflecting on the topic of constitution, what's your own experience as a fund manager of this kind? For the role that the interdependence of global financial markets can play as far as catalyzing Africa's rapid inclusivity.
Thank you very much. And let me also join everyone in congratulating FirstBank. 125 years is no joke to keep an institution going. In Holland, we're a Dutch company. If you do 100 years, they'll change your name to Royal. That's why you have Royal Dutch Shell, Royal Films Electronics. These are companies that have done 100 years. So 125 years is quite an accomplishment, and I think that's something worth noting. And I also want to thank the FirstBank. The NSIA has had a long history with FirstBank. First of all, we have two members of our board who are also on the board of FirstBank. The group managing director and Wakili Sokoto, who is, interestingly, two of them chair are both investment committees of the NSIA board. And before that, we have Mrs. Sibuka Woshika, who was in the inaugural board of the NSIA, as well as Alhaji Maria Rashid. So, wonderful relationship with two funds, and I want to thank you for that. Now let's go back to the topic at hand, in terms of global interdependency. I think the NSIA in its role has had a unique insight into what it takes to attract foreign capital into Nigeria. And the first observation for me was we needed to show that we were serious about investing in our own country and approach the international community from a point of strength and a point of seriousness. And one of the first observations we had was in our infrastructure fund. Many of you probably know many public funds to have savings fund and to have a stabilization fund. But the Nigeria Sovereign Investment Authority also has an infrastructure fund, which is not common among sovereign wealth funds. And that infrastructure fund is for domestic infrastructure investments. And the biggest challenge we saw, and I'm going to speak to you from a few case studies, was that getting people to invest wasn't as easy as we had thought. However, we also observed that there were pools of capital that were latent in the country that could not cross over and invest in infrastructure because there were institutional gaps that needed to be filled. One of those was pension funds. For a long time, we kept battling with how do you get pension funds to invest in infrastructure. Structuring it in a manner that appealed to pension funds was not possible because we observed that there was a gap. And that gap, with the NSI decided to solve it by creating infra-credit. Infra-credit was initially 100% owned by the NSIA, but it's now being diluted down as we get other investors into infra-credit. And what it does is very simple. It provides enhancement for infrastructure funds. And that allows infrastructure companies to issue long-term bonds at a lower cost with the guarantee that's provided by infra-credit. It was done jointly by the NSIA and Garantco. It's still a small company, maybe that's why many of you haven't felt the impact. It's only within 2 transactions. But what it has done was to reduce the cost of these companies. First company we sponsored the bond. We're borrowing money at 24%, 3-year money. But they were now able to issue 10-year money and borrow money at 16%. Now, still very far from where we'd like it to be, but we changed the fortune of that company. There are 2 or 3 other transactions now being written by infra-credit. For us, what we observed was this institutional gap that needed to be filled. The reality is that governments have only 2 currencies to fund infrastructure. You either have cash, or people will have faith in you and they can issue guarantees. But it doesn't also have to be sponsored by government. Infra-credit is privately owned. The moment we have investors, AFW is invested, AFC is invested, and we're looking to see a few more investors coming into infra-credit towards the end of the year. So that institutional gap needed to be filled. We also saw many others. Many of you have been in this room that the NSI incubated NMRC, which is mortgage financing company, and also incubated part of DBN, Development Bank of Nigeria. So filling these gaps for us is something that we thought was really essential. But what that gap did was suddenly we found that pension funds that hadn't been able to effectively invest in infrastructure could then come in. The second bond was 160% oversubscribed by insurance companies and pension funds, and looking for the third and the fourth and the 5th bond these companies will issue. That, I think, is what Emma was referring to in our early conversation. But I think that is a role that the NSI itself can fill. So filling these institutional gaps is absolutely important. The second for us was actually ensuring that we can manage these assets when we invest in them. And we picked a few other areas like that are partly social, healthcare. Well, our biggest challenge with healthcare, and like what Professor Nachimoku said earlier, education and healthcare were also very important as social infrastructure needed to be addressed. The strategy had been to work with teaching hospitals and federal medical centers. Many of you are aware we took over the oncology center and we built it. It's a privately owned entity at the moment, owned by the NSIA, with foreign operators running it for us while training our own people so that we can then hand it over to Ruth in 7 to 10 years. We're doing the same thing in Kano and Omwane. We have about 10 of these lined up. Now, I speak to case studies, so I apologize. I have no real theoretical understanding of it. I'm an engineer, not an economist. But so when I speak with practical realities about what we've accomplished. The idea behind this suddenly was, after we've done the first 3, capital were now calling for us to say, can we partner with you in the next 10? So, board is talking about creating a fund around this. The reality for us is we need to show that A, we're able to mobilize our own capital internally, we're able to create institutions that allow them to participate in infrastructure. And having done that, also show that we can manage them. Then it becomes easy for capital to flow. So our intervention has become a lot better because 2 weeks ago I had 2 funds called and said, well, your healthcare projects, can we participate in the next 5 to 9 steps? This set funds, 3 years ago when I went to speak to them, track record of investments, nothing to show for what we've done with it. We couldn't really engage. So we are not unable to interconnect, we're not unable to engage, but we must show and come at the table, in my opinion, with a track record of having actually shown that we can. And I'll lastly at that point speak to, and graciously thank the Honourable Minister of Finance because of the support the NSI has received in terms of being able to get capital from the government. Today, the NSI runs roughly $2.6 billion, made up of 1.5 of core capital, over 200 of retained earnings, and then directed capital from the Ministry of Finance of roughly $800 million. All of this capital put together, the fact that we are able to work closely with government to say, let's work on certain key projects, I believe, in my opinion, is a signal that is now going to attract foreign investments. So let me speak to one example. Many of you are aware, through the Presidential Infrastructure Development Fund, the NSIA now is taking over Abuja Kano Highway, Lagos Ibadan Expressway, and Second Niger Bridge. As we continue to execute those projects, already we're starting to see people say, okay, when it's time to concession, can we then talk to you? The reality is that for a country of our size, and a lot of statistics to roll out, the capital in this country is still significant. We just must find a way to harness them, pull them together, and then approach international community, in my opinion, for a position of strength. That's my limited experience, and so far in this work. Thank you.
How much more? Because originally our thinking, and this only was outside, was so what's MSI is supposed to do? We thought it would be the replacement for the excess food account. Now, and so the question that I leave you to consider is, were the NSIA to replace the excess food account, would it be able to, should we say, function as effectively as it does now on the rather more limited capacity? Just consider that. Now, this second round of questions, I'm going to take the indulgence of our Honourable Public Policy leaders to come to them last. So I'll start with Emmett in terms of your thoughts around inclusion and financial markets, especially in Nigeria, but bearing in mind our theme around international global dependence.
Thank you. It's a little tough to connect those dots, but I'll do my best. So I think from our perspective, one of the things that we see across the world is the role of the financial sector in basically being the conduit to what's happening in the macroeconomic environment. So whenever we want to get a sense of what is happening or the impact of what's happening in the macroeconomic environment, we look at the financial sector because it hits the financial sector first and then it hits the real economy. And so again, we go back to policy and reforms as being critical to determining whether or not we can get a sense of whether or not the policy response is correct. One of our previous vice presidents at the World Bank, who was the finance minister of Indonesia, said for her, the telltale sign of a good policymaker is not, is really on how they respond to crises, because the crises will always happen. So to the specific question, when it comes to financial inclusion in Nigeria, there's a lot that needs to be done. I think we all know some of the statistics of where Nigeria ranks with respect to its peers. There is so much more room for Nigeria to grow, and Nigeria is a beacon for regional countries and across Africa. So it is disappointing that we have not seen more in the space of financial inclusion. When I say financial inclusion, what I mean is making sure that the average Nigerian has access to financial services. It's improving, but not as fast and not as rapidly as we've seen in other countries. You mentioned that in Nigeria we have, a certain number of BVNs that are activated, and that does not represent the number of potential adults who could have a bank account. That also bears fruit in that when you look at private capital to GDP, Nigeria is doing really poorly with respect to its peers. So there's a lot more that needs to be done in order to improve financial inclusion. We've seen, again, a couple of very big strides in the last 12 months or so to improve that. Again, much more needs to be done. Personally, from my own perspective, I really would like to see Nigeria be an innovator in this space, to be a trailblazer in this space. There are 190 million, 180, 200. There are a lot of people in Nigeria. So the reality is that Nigeria can do a lot to really activate and catalyze financial inclusion, not just for Nigeria, but also for the region. So my call to action for the financial institutions in Nigeria is to do more in that regard, is to really innovate in that regard. With respect to how that links to interdependencies, I think it goes back to the question of, again, how do investors see Nigerians investing in Nigeria? When we see really low rates of private capital to GDP, there's a question mark. What is happening to all this capital that should be deployed in Nigeria? Why aren't the banks investing in Nigerian companies? What are the issues? So we spent a lot of time trying to think about some of those things. There's a whole question around the risk environment. There's a question about capacity. There's a bigger question about innovation. We talked about that. There's a question about regulatory environment. There are a number of different issues that can unlock that. But again, when we see more of that, that is when you're going to have more investment capital looking to invest in Nigeria. I just want my last remark again to be around this call to action for the financial services sector to really innovate in this space. Recently, we introduced here in Nigeria an act that will allow an average Nigerian who is in business to basically use a desk or a speaker as collateral for a loan. Now, the take-up of that is still in the very early days. Most Nigerians don't know anything about it, but the reality is that collateral no longer needs to be a binding constraint for Nigerians, to our average Nigerians, to borrow. So we don't have to take traditional routes to get there. We can take routes that speak to the needs of the average Nigerian, but it will only happen if we have more take-up on innovation, pushing the envelope, and ensuring that the Nigerian financial institutions are speaking to the needs of Nigerians. And I can guarantee you that private capital, investment capital from the likes of IFC and other DFIs, as well as institutional investors, that will absolutely follow.
Thank you very much. Right, so Jay, let me come back to you. Sorry that it's much faster than my time anticipated. But remember the point I left with around if we were to make more, in other words, the Honorable Minister in her comments had spoken about fiscal buffers. So if these fiscal buffers were built, then how do you see that affecting the kind of working and the position of the fund that you manage in a global perspective?
I would also add on the matter of that you left with me, which is access to that the NSIA. My own Minister of Finance will have their perspective on that, but I would probably speak my personal view on this. The fiscal buffers are important. They're very important, whether it's through the NSIA or through any other vehicle. And the reason is because the fiscal buffers speak to your exchange stability, which obviously is extremely important for foreign investors. They also speak to your fiscal discipline as a country, which also are all factors that people find very important. So does it make it easier for us as a fund to attract other investors? Absolutely. Because it also speaks to the ability of the government to honor its commitments, be it in the power sector, be it in any other type of investment. So all of that are very important. Now, the vehicle by which that is held, in my opinion, depends on the legislative environment, obviously. Now, to the NSIA and to the access group, my view is very simple. I think the NSIA, and I'll speak to the NSIA itself, still needs to season. Still needs to season as an organization. We still need to see transitions of management, leadership, all of that stuff are all things that say an organization is seasoned. And I think with that, it has to build trust. It's only been in existence for 6 years. My view is that the transition can start to be gradual. but it still needs to season itself as an organization. And I wouldn't be giving my own scorecard, but the reality is that it has the legislative framework, it has the relationships, in my opinion, to be that buffer, be that catalyst to bring capital into the country. But also, I think the best way to preserve capital is to invest it. It's the best way, because otherwise you suffer what business schools professors call it because of free cash flow. You build up the excess group, if there's no real control around it, somebody who has the discipline comes in and sponsors it. That's what happens if you don't have those kind of legislative framework. But my view is very simple. I think the NSI is still in itself, still needs to see as an organization before it can play that role that is being described.
Well, thank you very much for your comment. Before I come to Dan, let me come back to our public policy. Let me start with you, Honorable Minister for Budget and Planning for Ghana. You will recall I left you with essentially two questions. One is, you spoke about the need to add value to raw materials. And I said, well, we know that. We've never doubted that. The question is, so why haven't we done it? And what needs to happen to make us to make us do that. And then also we spoke about exporting capital. And then I also left you to ponder that. So what needs to be done from a public policy framework that helps retain capital that currently flows out in the African financial system?
Yeah, let me first of all talk about the value added issue first, and now talk about the illicit flows. You see, the reason why we export products with our sense of historical attitude. In the past, we have always been exported to raw materials and things like that, and we have always been encouraged to export finished products. But the problem is this. See, it is not in the interest of those that we buy for to encourage us to actually produce it. It's not in their interest. And indeed, I had a chance to talk to somebody somewhere in Europe of trying to come back to Ghana, to set up a chocolate factory. So, but we produce the chocolate there. If we do it there, what are our jobs? We will get calling jobs in the country. So they wouldn't want to do that. But then, the major problem is with us. Because it is an easy way of, with due respect to finance ministers and all of us, and even the private sector, it's very easy for us to export the raw materials, and it's the cheapest way of generating revenue for the country and for generating income for money in the country. Because it's the easy way. That's what the lazy man's choice. That's what we will do. And that's what we actually doing over the years without going in there and doing the hard things of actually, adding value, transforming the product into maybe a semi-finished product or into a final product. But that leads to the lack of capital, and that will lead me to this illicit thing. You see, certainly, if you're going to rely on the developed world to get capital to do these things here, we will not succeed. Because, you see, each time, and I'm sure you haven't heard any even the World Bank or any donor trying to give you resources to set up a factory, but they will then give you resources to produce, maybe for water generation or for water for your people. Really, will you get somebody who will be prepared from the developed world to say that, oh, I'll give you a subsidized loan for you to go and set up a factory? It is very rare, it may not happen. So therefore, it is up to us to generate the capital from within. And then too is the problem of the capital that is within being taken out illicitly. So that becomes a catch-22. We need to generate the resources here, the capital here, but the capital that we have here is also flying away. And why is that also happening? It is happening because So at times, there is stability in the economy. People have the resources and they don't want to keep their resources here, so they will take them outside. That would be one reason for everybody. But for politicians and other people, you know, I'm a politician, but if you're a politician, the expectation from your own people that being a politician, you have to have a lot of money. That expectation alone drives a lot of politicians into that area. But then if you have a lot of dollars, how do you keep the dollars in that in Nigeria or in Ghana? They have to find a way to take it outside the country where you cannot be safe. So I think these are problems, real issues. These are real problems, but you know, you find it difficult to talk about them. But that is the main crux of it. First of all, for everybody, if the economy is not doing very well, you may have to take your money away. And for some of us, and for some politicians too, because you have excess of it and you don't want people to see that, you have to travel outside the country. So I think the sanctions to those who really do this illicit should be very powerful from an deterrent for politicians or for anybody else to send capital out of the country illicitly. It can be done in a legal way, but the illicit one is the one who is creating the problem. The African Union estimates that about $50 billion a year leaves this continent into the other world through illicit transfers. So that is where we should capture the resources and use that in trying to develop this adding value to these raw materials. Because there is nobody outside the continent who will say that you come and help us get out of our problems. Period.
All right, at least now. So enabling environment has to be. We've heard some things from your colleague from Ghana. Questions then to you is, are there specifics going forward for Nigeria, or indeed continental, that you might find? There's an area which might be helpful if touched on, which, as I said, is the African continental future. That is, for me, that is an area of continental interdependence that potentially could propel, this continent. And so, your thoughts around that and the environment.
We can use the global interdependencies to leap forward and to go very, very fast. But this will only happen if we learn from some of the things that we didn't do well before. And let me start by saying that I want to emphasize that must have a price-based fiscal rule to delink development from the costs, from the boom and bust cycles. We must also be able to have the flexibility and really do increase taxes when growth is high and provide incentives when growth is low, especially when we're in recession. We must also be able to invest in fiscal government, such as the excess flows, but more importantly, in institutions like the NSI, and we must do this on a consistent basis. Right now, the investments that we do in NSI is when we have accumulated enough money and when we are able to convince the governors we invest in the NSI. Whereas it should be, even by the law, setting up the NSI should be something you do on an autopilot, that you have a criteria that you use, that you save on a consistent basis, not until you have to give money to invest. We must also adjust to current realities. Because today is today, tomorrow is a different day altogether. We must accelerate, and we are already doing this, prioritizing capital expenditure, even in recurrent expenditure. We are prioritizing what we spend, the scarce monies that we have. We are cutting costs across government. We are trying to enhance revenue by placing special emphasis on diversifying revenue away from dependence on oil and gas. And we've achieved some progress in this because the non-oil sector revenue has grown. We are also working, of course, under the directive of the President, grant on removing the incentives that actually provide an opportunity for corruption to thrive. On the ease of doing business, it also has a lot to do with fiscal policies that you have in place, with sensing what the market currently requires, and de-risking businesses as on the whole, literally on the whole. So we have to make regulation easy so that businesses can thrive, and that the burdens that we put in business on businesses is not so onerous that they go under very, very easily. We also must invest in governance and in strengthening our institutions. We must provide rules that must be followed. So if a business has to do an activity with a government agency, it must be done under a certain period of time. It shouldn't take forever for an investment decision to be made, or even for credit to be accessed. To also enhance business, we must continue to invest in critical infrastructure, especially transport, as well as communication, so that the burdens that we put on businesses in Nigeria will be relieved, and they can concentrate on what is core to them. Government also has prioritized human capital, because when it comes to the bottom line, it is people that you depend on. And even though there's a lot of automation that is taking away some jobs, but when you continuously develop human capital, that in itself will not be a threat. So I think if we do all this, we will end up with an economy that is growing in a manner that is both sustainable as well as inclusive.
Right. Thank you very much. Now, before I invite Dan to respond to what he has heard, it would be useful to take probably one or two questions from the audience. I'll leave you guys to do that.
Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much to our moderators. May I just make a note here to say that we're only going to be here for another 15 minutes approximately, and I'd like our speakers to please remain on stage for the rest of the time that we're here. Thank you very much for your indulgence. We do have time for one question, and it's going to come from Dr. Umar Eliasu. I believe he's in the audience. Please come forward, sir. Dr. Umar Eliasu won't mind me saying that he's 87 years old, an economist and a former lecturer, former DG of the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, former advisor to 3 heads of state. He's still active in consultancy and his own autographed copy of Why Nations Fail from our author. But he has the opportunity today to ask the question, sir.
First of all, let me thank FirstBank for being 125 years old. I guess I can get there too. I was happy that I would see the man whose book made me cry when I first read it. And the question is, when you have institutions that are being subverted over and over again, how can such institutions even last? I read from your book that the institutions are the things that will maintain the society, just the rule of law as one such institution. When it is being subverted, can society survive? Let me leave it there.
Well, thank you very much for the question, and I was intrigued to hear all the... I think, let me end with 3 thoughts related to the question and also reacting to the important ideas already suggested by the panel. You know, rule of law, equality before the law, those are really critical ingredients of inclusive institutions. In the modern world, no way you can flourish when some people are treated differently than others. But, the main thing that I want to emphasize, it was part of the speech, but I want to reiterate. Put it simply, good institutions are not born and are not gifted. One line of thought, very dominant. You design institutions. Some leader comes in the US, the founding fathers, they designed a beautiful constitution and everything flows forward. Reality, unfortunately, is much more complex. Good institutions are made, and they're made by society, and they're recreated day in and day out. The conditions that you start with really are important. They're much, much harder to found and maintain in Nigeria, given its history, given when in 1960 independence, how little there was, and all of the differences and the difficulties that 200 million people, a country, a vast country, creates. But that doesn't change the reality that those institutions have to be created. And those institutions have to be created for the Nigerians of the future, because there is no other alternative. I think Nigeria has great potential, but it can only realize them if such institutions are really built and are maintained, are recreated as the conditions change. So I think the Honorable Minister is absolutely right. The question is how to move beyond natural resources. But the way to do that is to use technology, to use capital, to use expertise. And for that, we need the institutional foundation. I want to emphasize it. I think all of the panelists have put a lot of emphasis on capital, as it deserves to be emphasized. But it's only one of the three axes that the modern world necessitates. The other one is technology. Foreign capital is most useful because it comes bundled with technology. And in this global interdependent world, countries such as Nigeria have an opportunity not to move slowly through the ranks of technology, but to jump. And for that, we really need to be completely open, embracing, and enthusiastic about technology. But the third one, and that was quite sensitive to my quote, and I want to reiterate, is expertise. The FirstBank, the sovereign fund, you cannot have these things without expertise. That expertise is completely different. In the 17th century in Europe, there were no bureaucrats. There were no professional bureaucrats. That is an expertise that Europe took 300 years to build. But it is critical. The ethos of bureaucracy, people who have an expertise in what they do. If we have the finance ministry here, the budget of planning, if we have the health ministry, education ministry, taxation, all of those really need to be manned by people who have amazing expertise. That expertise takes a while to build. Human capital of the whole population is critical for that, but it's also society's control that institutions being created and recreated is critical. You can put the best people in the ministry, but unless you monitor them, you motivate them, and their ethos of service to society develops, that's not going to be no good. And that expertise also requires, and I will repeat, trust of society. And that trust is not granted, it's earned. So all of the ministries and all of the institutions, they need to work hard to earn that trust. And once we come to that happy medium, where expertise is building and is being put to service for society to provide health, education, services, and the regulation that's necessary for the modern world and modern technology, then more trust will come, more expertise will come. But keep on investing in the Nigerian people, because that's where all of that is going to come from. Thank you.
Just a brief note to recognize our linkage with our heritage and the royal fathers present here. As mentioned, the entourage from the Oluobori present here today. But also we have the Orango of Okeland, Obade Doku, Abolaniwa, also with us. And with a very special connection with FirstBank, we have His Royal Highness Sanusi Zamido Sanusi Serikitani also has joined us. And perhaps maybe not a royal father in that sense, but certainly a father of the bank, Alhaji Umaru Murtala Bumiswa. I'd like to thank our very distinguished panel, and if I may just add that Professor George Guan before was being quite economical when he mentioned his qualifications for being here. He is the Honorable Minister of Budget and Planning in Ghana, but he also supervised the preparation of the coordinated program for the economic and social development of Ghana between 2002 and 2012. He was Deputy Minister of Finance and Economic Planning from March 2005 to December 2008, and since January 2009, he's a Member of Parliament for the Wenchi constituency. He's been a ranking member of the Trade, Industry and Tourism Committee, Education Committee, Poverty Reduction Committee, and the acting chairman of the Special Budget Committee. Almost overqualified to be here with us. And a very good replacement for Mr. Kemi Koyata, Minister of Finance. Thank you, sir. It's with very great pleasure that I now call on the very, very patient wife of our Vice President, Professor Yemi Oshibajo, in the presence, in person of Mrs. Dobako Oshibajo, to come and give a good home message.
Represented by the Honorable Minister of Finance, Mrs. Zainab Ahmed, the Group Chairman of the FirstBank of Nigeria, Dr. Obafemi Otunjoko, CFR, all former governors here present, Honorable Minister of Power, Works and Housing, Babatunde Fashola, the Honorable Minister of Budget and Planning in Ghana, Professor Gian Bafor, Chairman of FirstBank, Mrs. Ikwawo Shika, the Group Managing Director of FBN Holding, Mr. Ake, the MD CEO of FirstBank, Dr. Shola Adekunso, the Chairman FBN Quest, Malandelo Nachito, all royal fathers here present, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I must thank FirstBank for their kind invitation to this event, to this public lecture. Permit me to join my voice with others as we celebrate and applaud FirstBank for being in existence for 125 years. I congratulate the chairman, the board, the management, the staff, the shareholders, and the faithful customers for this great feat. I marvel at the ability of FirstBank to remain standing through the many seasons of Nigeria. As I look forward to this lecture this morning, I was afraid that I would be asked to speak on finance, which is not my discipline. But I must thank our speaker and the distinguished panelists for this very thought-provoking morning. I peel off the lovely banners advertising FirstBank for 125 years. And I look beyond the banner to investigate what this 125 years represent. And I wonder how many people have been employed in 125 years. I wonder how many dependents the staff of FirstBank for 125 years have. How many meals were paid for by their staff? How many plots of land bought, children sent to school, special celebrations paid for, weddings, birthdays, paid for by the staff of FirstBank. I believe they deserve an applause. Beyond the impact they would have had on their staff for 125 years is also the impact they must have had on so many customers. FirstBank clearly supports women. I was at the inauguration or the opening of the first gem, which especially supports women. so many customers would have been supported in this 125 years. Farmers, factory owners, business owners, petty traders, and so much more. But as I look beyond the banner, what I see is a sheer delight and joy of a little girl or boy that gets a toy on his or her birthday because a parent has been helped by FirstBank. I dabble in gardening and plant 1 or 2 crops behind the house, even in Abuja. And I know the joy of harvesting our yams, or maybe going to the back to get some fresh vegetables. And beyond the banner, I also see the joy of the farmers that must have been helped by FirstBank, the joy of their crops, of the sale of their crops, the joy of the person who holds the keys to their first home, built brick by brick by themselves. Beyond the banner, I see these smiles. Beyond the banner, I see these people. And as I do, I pray for FirstBank. I pray that these conversations we have heard this morning will continue to help the people, because clearly this bank is about people. I pray for FirstBank that they go from strength to strength and from grace to grace. I pray they do better and become bigger and go higher. I make these prayers for a very selfish reason. And the selfish reason is because even the area boys need help. And I pray as they go higher, they will have the ability to help even more Nigerians. In short, my prayer is that FirstBank goes to the next level. Thank you.
And say that we invite you back up onto the stage so that we can do the proper thing and reward you for the patience you have shown in being with us this morning. Mrs. Awushika, the chairperson of FirstBank Nigeria PLC, will be making the presentation.
Hello ma.
Very strong ladies. And while the wife of the Vice President goes to a seat, Mrs. Dolapo Shibajo, would we also ask her to please remain with us for another 5 minutes so that we can do a group photograph right after Zainab Ahmed, the Honorable Minister of Finance for Nigeria, and the second portfolio to come and please deliver the goodwill message from His Excellency President Muhammad Buhari, GCFR, President and Commander-in-Chief of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, whom she is representing.
Excellency, the wife of the Vice President, my sister, the Executive Group Chairman of the FirstBank of Nigeria, Dr. Obafemi Utudeko, the Honorable Minister of Power, Works and Housing, I think he's left, the Minister of Budget and Planning of Ghana, Professor Gian Bafo, the Chairman of FirstBank of Nigeria, Mrs. Bukung Awushika, the Group Managing Director of FirstBank Holdings, Mr. Ike, Your Royal Highness, the Emir of Kano, our father, Sanusi, Lamido Sanusi, other royal fathers that are here today, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. So I have a speech that was prepared for me from my office to deliver on behalf of the President. But I want to start by congratulating the FirstBank for attaining this very unique milestone. I don't think there's any institution in Nigeria that is 125 years old. I also want to congratulate the FirstBank holder for receiving the Best Corporate Governance Award in Nigeria. At the 2019 World Finance Award, which was held in London, in the London Stock Exchange recently. So I have the speech, but I also have a letter that was written by the President to the President, and I think that would be better because this is the President's own words. And let me just read. This letter was addressed to the Chief Executive Officer of FirstBank, and it says, Dear Mr. Adebutu, I am pleased to facilitate with you and the entire board and management and staff of FirstBank Limited on the 125th anniversary of your bank, a noble and rare milestone in the history of our dear country. This is a landmark to the entire country as FirstBank has lived its name as the foremost financial services provider in Nigeria. Your bank has provided a platform for local and international trade to thrive in our country from the pre-colonial era through to the amalgamation and beyond. I commend your iconic institution for its consistency in providing financial services to Nigeria and the world at large for the past 125 years. Your bank is representing the country positively within and outside Africa and has maintained its enviable leadership position despite the rapid changes in the global economy. Apart from its longevity, your bank deserves commendation for innovation and for regeneration. On behalf of my family and the entire nation, I say thank you for your great impact on our dear nation. Congratulations. Yours sincerely, Muhammad Buhari, GCFR, President and Commander-in-Chief of the Federal Republic of Nigeria.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Zainab Ahmed, delivering that message from His Excellency, the President. And I'd like now to invite the GMD of FBN Holdings, Seyude Eke, to come and make a presentation to her. And also a signed copy of our guest lecturer. Guest lecturer's book. Thank you very much. The wife of the Vice President, Mrs. I noticed she was taking a lot of notes during the lecture, but maybe the book will make it a lot easier.
And we will deliver that.
And we will deliver that immediately after I invite the Chief Executive Officer of FirstBank, Dr. Adeshola Adebutu, to come and give the vote of thanks. I'm very proud to see you. Your Excellency, President Muhammadu Buhari, GCFR, ably represented today
by the Honorable Minister of Finance, Haji Zainab Ahmed, Your Excellency, the President of the Republic of Ghana, also ably represented by that country's Minister of Budget and Planning, Our Royal Highnesses, Your Excellency, the wife of the Vice President, Federal Republic of Nigeria, Mrs. Dolapo Oshibajo, Royal Highnesses, elder statesmen, members of cabinet, members of the diplomatic corps here present, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Before I proceed with my assignment, there were two key strands that kept reverberating during the course of the panel discussion that are quite relevant to our back. One, it's 125 years of FirstBank. But the reason why this institution has survived and is getting stronger and stronger is because innovation, transformation is ingrained in the DNA of our institution. So when the lead speaker spoke about innovation, spoke about transformation, he spoke about robotics and artificial intelligence, it was as if he had insight into the strategy of our bank. So our bank is on the leading edge of innovation, and today we actually have an innovation laboratory situated in the heart of Yaba, which is the hub of innovation in Lagos. The second important strand is about financial inclusion. FirstBank is the only financial institution in this country that is present in the nooks and crannies of our country. With over 7 we have over 750 branches. But more importantly, because we chose, for us, profitability is important, but economic growth and development is equally very important. And that was why we chose the logo or the motto for the anniversary woven into the fabrics of the society. Today, we are the only institution that has agencies that is available in all the 774 local governments that makes up the Federation of Nigeria. On the innovation front, we've been quite successful. Our first mobile app today has close to 3 million people that are actively transacting on that platform. But more importantly, our USSD *894#, which is the platform that we have decided to use for financial inclusion, currently has 7 million subscribers actively trading on that platform. So, the reason why we'll be here in perpetuity, that's FirstBank, is because in our DNA is our ability to transform, innovate, disrupt, be part of disruption, and lead disruption. Let me, on behalf of the group chairman, FirstBank Holding PLC, Oba Dr. Ayola Hutubeko, and the board of directors of FirstBank Holdings, and on behalf of Mrs. Ibukun Awoshika, chairman, board of directors of FirstBank, and directors of FirstBank, and directors of other operating entities of FirstBank Holdings, say a very big thank you to His Excellency Muhammadu Buhari, His Excellency the President of Ghana, Your Excellency the wife of the Vice President, Your Royal Highnesses, elder statesmen. I've seen at least 3 emeritus professors in this hall today. I saw Emeritus Professor Akin Kupe, and I think I also saw Professor Hanya. So this is a well-attended event. So on behalf of our board, we want to appreciate you. We want to thank you for finding time to attend this event. But the real deal is the 125 Gala Night, which is going to take place later on today. We look forward to receiving all of you. But more importantly, to assure our stakeholders on behalf of the group chairman, who is the moving spirit behind our group, that we have the foundation, we have what it takes, and like I said, we'll keep on innovating and transforming ourselves, and we'll be here for our stakeholders for another 125 years. Thank you, sir. The MC has graciously requested that I invite the group chairman to lead our VIP to the podium for photo sessions. To be followed immediately by members of the board of FBN Holdings, to be followed again by members of the board of FirstBank, and then directors of other operating entities of FBN Holdings.
We know we have so many eminent guests here, but a 125-year-old bank cannot fit onto this podium. So we've selected this group to represent all of us this morning. We do have copies of the book and a signing session to take place in the VIP room, which is the upper room. If you ask any Gustav, Babatunde Akana, John Okechukwu Obi, Evans Edoze Onyeko, Igwe, New Igwe, Fatai Olufeso Adeboyega, Princess Dolapo Olope, Olubukola Abiyo, Junior John Golube, and Bashir J.K. Ryan. There's a copy for you in the signing room if you go along there. And there should be also a few copies available in other parts of the room. Our ushers will be able to direct you to where they are taken.
Wait Friday.
I can acknowledge the presence of the President of the